Oh, yeah.
Hey everyone, good morning. So Tamarie is actually going to be, she's taking care of a student affair right now, so I'm going to be introducing Dr. James Barger this morning. He's the WT saxophone professor, and yeah, he's going to be giving you some saxophone pedagogy. Hopefully everybody online can hear us, and yeah, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Dr. Barger.
Awesome, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here this morning, sharing some information with y'all. I know that we have a very wide range of experience, level of experience, years of experience. Please, at any point, raise your hand, shout out questions. Feel free to interrupt me. There's no way that in an hour or just under an hour we can get through everything there is to be covered. So I'm going to start pretty basic, and we'll kind of blast through these first couple of topics. By the way, did everybody get a handout? Very cool. I wanted to reduce the number of trees that I was killing with all these handouts, so I do have a packet of some extra resources. If you'll go to this website, wtsaxophone.com/bandcamp, you can do that today during the clinic, at home online. Also, alternatively, you could just send me an email at any time. I'd be happy to share some of these resources with you. Anything that I could do to help out, more than happy to do so. So we're going to start really quickly at the very beginning, instrument assembly. And I know some of this stuff is really common sense, but whenever I go out and visit middle schools and high schools, I see all kinds of interesting things. So it definitely is worth covering very quickly. First thing, when I'm working with beginner groups, always have their neck strap on. That's the very first thing that I do, because whenever we pick up the instrument here in just a few seconds, especially to a sixth grader, this is a large instrument, a lot of money, very delicate. We want to make sure that the instrument is secured from the very beginning. Step one, I always have the student shoulder raised in the mouth. This is like classroom management 101. Okay, so students are coming in, you can just train them. Go ahead and get your reed soaking. They're not going to chit chat with their neighbor or make jokes with their friends. I'm not going to soak this reed and try to talk through it for right now. I always begin, and I should say, and I know we can't do this on the live feed, but I always have students set their cases on the floor at their feet. Perhaps a flute, clarinet, oboe, you can get away with having it in your lap. I've seen way too many saxophone cases topple backwards as a result of trying to assemble the instrument from their lap. So always down on the floor at their feet. But for today, I'll have this up here. All the students should have a mouthpiece cap, super important, very inexpensive to replace. This is going to protect the delicate, fragile tip of the mouthpiece. Once the tip and the rails are damaged, it's really hard to reset that. If you want your saxophonist to have a beautiful sound, this is going to be the start of that. So whenever I'm storing my mouthpiece, always with the cap in the case. You should also have some cork grease to apply and rub that into the cork so that this is really easy to assemble. I always instruct students, whatever their non-dominant hand, for me, my left hand, I want to grab the neck in sort of this pistol grip, and I want to protect this top octave lever, okay? How many of y'all have had students that struggle anything below like a middle D? Okay, frequently, and especially on beginner model saxophones, this is a very delicate lever here. It's really easy to get bent just a little bit. Even to the naked eye, it looks just fine, but if this pad is not sealing here at the top, you're gonna have a lot of issues. If that does happen, this C-shaped lever, I simply press up with my thumb and you can close that down a little bit. It's a really easy, quick fix if you're having response issues down middle to low register. Oftentimes it's just that, especially on those beginner model horns. So when I'm assembling, pistol grip, thumb on the top of the octave key, dominant hand just right around the mouthpiece, and a simple twisting motion will get me there. Ligature, of course there's two styles of ligatures. I use an inverted ligature where the screws are on the back. Most of the students will have a traditional ligature where the screws are on the front side of the mouthpiece, on the reed side. Nevertheless, when you're looking head on at the reed, screws are always going to be facing to your right. okay, to the student's right. I see that time and time again. I go and do a class and students' ligatures are on upside down and backwards and every which way. And that's a really easy fix to help with response issues, to make sure that the ligature is on correctly. Once their reed is soaked, by now my reed is soaked, I always come in from the top, from the blunt end of the reed down into the ligature. That's just to protect the fragile tip of the reed. I don't want to come in from the bottom. Likewise, I don't want to play this like carnival game of don't touch the sides with my shaky hands. Like, I'm going to miss eventually. So always ligature, slide it up with the thumb, come in from the top. And then at eye level, I want to make sure that the tip of the reed is aligned with the tip of the mouthpiece. Many mouthpieces will have this sort of beveled, scored edge around the backside all the way around. Similarly, many clarinet mouthpieces will have the same thing. We call that the ligature line. That gives us a rough indication of where that top edge of the ligature should sit. And then I just want to tighten those screws just until they're snug. Don't need a death vise on the reed. Still want it to vibrate just enough to hold it secure. I always have students assemble this first, okay? Once you get to be our size, like I can usually get away with having the full saxophone and kind of angle it and get the reed on. A sixth grader is going to have great difficulty with that. So just baby saxophone, just the neck only. Go ahead and get the reed, the ligature, everything going. Okay. Before I assemble the full instrument. When we're taking the saxophone out of the case, the bell looks like a real easy handle. Okay, I can get away with this because it's reinforced, but a student's instrument, when they're grabbing here and all the weight is pulling against, how many of y'all have had students that cannot play low Bs and B flats because they have bell leaks down here? Anybody? Very common repair issue, because as I'm holding this and the weight of the instrument is pulling down, this bell is actually torquing sideways, and these pads down here are no longer going to seal. So this looks like an attractive handle. I always instruct students to pick up the horn by the middle of the body, okay? Doesn't look like a great handle, but you can just grip right around the center of all those rods, and it's gonna be a much better way to pick up the instrument. Students should also have an end cap in the top of their saxophone. This does two things. First of all, it protects the octave key post here at the top, okay? If this gets bent, this is bad news, in a similar fashion to if this octave lever gets bent. Okay. The other thing is this is going to ensure a proper fit inside the case. Okay? If this end plug goes missing, the horn is going to rattle around in the case. It's going to result in a lot of expensive repairs down the road. Okay? Saxophone neck should twist, insert very easily. We don't want to use any kind of like Vaseline or lubricant or anything on the neck, just a soft cloth to clean that out. If you have any patina or moisture or anything forming on there, that should go in really easily. And I want to make sure that the seam of the neck underneath is aligned with the octave key post. That's my starting position. Okay. Neck strap, hook right into the ring on the back of the instrument. Okay. Any questions so far? Like I said, most of that is common sense, but you'd be surprised at some of the things I've seen. I know it's not a lack of education going on, it's just sometimes kids forget, they need to be reminded of these things. So, yes sir?
You said only use like a cloth to clean the neck tenon. Someone's told me maybe denatured alcohol on a cloth would also clean it. I don't know if you've...
That would probably be okay. Honestly, like I've never had any issue with just like a soft, like a, like a chamois or, even a silk swab. You can see mine right now is like, it's a little rough. Just a couple swipes there. Likewise in here. This is unfinished brass on the inside of the socket here and on the outside of the tenon here. So it just naturally forms a patina over time, and already like that's so much easier just by giving it a good swipe. Just a clean, dry cloth. Yeah, so I would probably stay away from doing a lot of, unless you're restoring like a vintage horn, there's a lot of buildup. You can probably get away with just a nice cloth. Cool. All right, posture. I always say that a beautiful sound, a beautiful tone begins with a beautiful posture. This is really important when it comes to saxophone. I think partly because of the neck strap, and we're having the weight of the instrument like pulling down on us. A lot of students just have terrible posture, so I'm constantly correcting that. I don't think I need to go over all the basics of good woodwind posture with y'all. Just a couple of things. There's frequently a question with beginners, do they play in the middle or do they play on the side? Okay, and I'll give you the easy way to determine that. Can y'all see me if I'm sitting down? So the reason that we frequently begin beginner saxophonists on the side is because their torsos are not yet tall enough. If I play in the middle and I have a short torso, I cannot reach the right hand keys without resting my right forearm and wrist on my right thigh, okay? And so that is really the only reason I would have anybody play on the side. The center is much more comfortable and balanced, but if I cannot reach these keys, I'm gonna form a lot of bad habits. So we usually begin beginners on the side just because I can clear my entire right hand. Likewise, tenor players, almost exclusively on the side. If you're like 6'2" or taller, you can play tenor in the middle. As long as you can reach the right hand keys and still have a gap between your right forearm and your thigh, you're golden. And there are tenor players that play in the middle. Never seen a baritone sax player play in the middle. So bari and tenor most frequently on the side. Whenever we are having beginners play on the side, we always want the mouthpiece and neck and everything to come to us, okay? So I see a lot of the tilting necks. I mean, all of these parts are adjustable, so I can adjust the neck, can adjust the angle of the mouthpiece. So when I have students play on the side, I'm at like a 30 or 45 degree angle with the mouthpiece. It's really important that I'm not changing the angle of my throat and neck in order to come to the saxophone, okay? I also have students push the bell of the instrument out toward their right knee. Okay? And this has everything to do, I know that Mr. Story yesterday in his clarinet clinic talked a lot about angle of entry. We're going to talk about that in regards to saxophone as well. It's slightly different than clarinet. If I'm allowing the instrument to swing too far back here, it looks really cool and I got this cocked up elbow, but now I'm playing the saxophone a lot like a clarinet with an upward angle. So it's really important that I'm pushing this out toward the right knee. Likewise, if I'm playing in the middle, instead of my right leg, I'm hugging the inside of the bell to the inside of my left leg, okay? And again, I'm gonna push the instrument out toward my left knee. And that's gonna give me kind of a tripod of stability here, okay? In the middle, I of course want to straighten everything back out. When we're standing, I always tell students that the base of this E flat key guard here is going to hit your right hip bone, okay? And there is our tripod, okay? I always think about like having 3 points of contact when it comes to woodwind balance, okay? So obviously like clarinet, you have the thumbs and the teeth are anchoring. Flute, we talk about like having, you know, the tripod, the different points of focus. Here, I have the weight supported by the neck strap. And I keep my neck strap relatively high. It's holding all of the weight of the instrument. My hands are doing none of the work. In fact, I could just hang out here, okay? The horn has a tendency to fall over. That's all my hands are really doing. They're just kind of guiding the instrument left and right, okay? The weight is all supported by the neck strap. This hip bone becomes this other point of contact here, okay? Left hand position, about a 2 o'clock position with the left thumb. I see a lot of times students reaching up and down for the octave key. We want our students to be using their left thumb like a pinball flipper. It never actually moves laterally away from this thumb rest. It just overlaps the octave key in such a way that we can trigger that key with the thumb, okay? The right thumb can sit up under the thumb rest. I'll be totally honest with y'all, I frequently do not use the right thumb rest whenever I play the saxophone. Again, because the weight is supported by the neck strap. It's never supported by the right hand. It's never supported by the thumb except for marching band, okay? Marching band, I do support some of the weight of the instrument here on the right thumb. It's really not great for your hand, but it looks pretty on the field in uniform, so it's still what we teach. But standing position right here. My thumb usually just kind of hangs out somewhere below the thumb hook because that's where my hand naturally sits comfortably. Okay? A lot of people teach like make C's or like, hold a softball with your fingers. I personally don't teach that because whenever I play with curved fingers, I think that this actually creates tension. Like for me to actually curve my fingers, there is tension running through my arm. So I just have students shake out their hands. I call it dummy hands, like ventriloquist dummy, not like you're a dummy. Some of them might, no. Just shake out your hands, let them hang loose by your sides. And this is the perfect saxophone hand position, okay? Absolutely no tension, okay? Fingers are slightly curved, but not into a beautifully formed round C. It's a little bit more narrow. Okay? Saxophone is a very ergonomic instrument. Okay, we have the benefit of hundreds of years of technological development from the time that earlier instruments were invented to the time that Adolph Sax conceived of the saxophone. So we have closed fingers. We don't have open holes or anything. Pearls. Very comfortable to get our hands on the saxophone. But because of that, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Saxophonists can get away with horrendous finger technique, and frequently do because it's like we don't have open holes. So you really have to be on your students early on, making sure that they do have good posture, that they do have good finger technique, good hand position. Otherwise, they're going to get away with it for a while until they can no longer get away with it. Then they have 3, 5, 7 years of bad habits to break when they can no longer keep up with the demands of the literature. So really preaching hand position from an early start. Any questions so far? We okay? All right. Let's talk about the embouchure. There are going to be a lot of parallels with what Mr. Story talked about on clarinet yesterday. Certainly in clarinet pedagogy, there are different schools of thought. Likewise, in saxophone pedagogy, there are different schools of thought. Mr. Story talked about yesterday, what did he call it? A soft cushion, right? I teach the same thing on saxophone. So the lips are rounded, okay? I like to think of the lips and the embouchure forming a wheel, okay? Where there is equal pressure coming in from all sides, like the spoke of a wheel, okay? The lips should be wrinkly, okay? Meaning that they're not stretched thin. I think Mr. Story called that a hard cushion, okay? So we want corners to be pushed inward. A lot of times, I know I'm stepping off camera for a second. I'll use the analogy of like a rubber band or a loop like this. So students will frequently have their corners coming out. We want to push their corners in, which is going to create a beautiful round, equal exerted pressure from all sides. Okay? You could have them say the word ooh. That'll get you really close to where we want to be. I do have to correct my southern students. It's not ooh, but ooh. We're really getting this rounded, no West Texas accents. Okay, very important. The tongue. Tongue is really important because the tongue is what is going to control the air. I think of the tongue very similarly to the flap of an airplane wing. Okay, the flap goes down, we create lift. Flap goes up, we create drag, right, in order to control, or like the rudder of a boat. Okay, likewise, the angle of my tongue in the mouth is going to affect the speed and the direction of the air coming out of the body into the mouthpiece. I always teach a high tongue position in the back for saxophone. This might go kind of against what some people have learned. I always keep the back of my tongue very high, okay? The reason I do that is it helps pressurize the air. So everybody say, can you say the word he? He. Now whisper the word he. Now sustain it. Okay? And so I constantly tell my college saxophone students, like, hiss like a cat. okay? That's where my tongue position always is, okay? Regardless if I'm playing in the upper register, okay? Even if I'm playing in the low register. Okay, high back of the tongue creates a small opening, creates a jet stream of air. Okay, how many of y'all have heard like these foghorn low B flat sounds on the saxophone? A lot of times it's because I'm dropping the tongue. Okay, the air is just coming out spread. I always teach a very focused airstream, and that starts with an elevated back of the tongue. Okay, question, yes?
Sorry, yeah. So that way of thinking with the high back of the tongue, does that also translate to the bigger saxophones? Because I have very saxes that get really loud and blasting. So training them on alto to raise the back of the tongue, does that still translate over to a very sax? Sort of. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I know you're going to have to adjust.
Sure. For me, it does.
Okay.
Yeah. I always think about keeping the back of the tongue. Okay, I'm talking about the very back. If you go back to that hissing or whispering, the he sound, can you feel the sides of your molars with the sides of your tongue? Okay, so my tongue is anchored up there in the very back, really, really high up.
So
okay?
using the analogy of hissing like a cat to your very saxophone player should still create the same results as they do on alto.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, that's going to get the air spinning through the instrument. Okay. Other things are going to be slightly different. The rest of the tongue is going to have a slightly different role. The embouchure, and naturally the aperture will be much larger because of the larger mouthpiece. Yeah, so that can be a little controversial because a lot of times people think like clarinet, really high tongue, saxophone, like middle or lowish tongue. Honestly, that's how I learned. And more recently, I've been experimenting on saxophone with a higher tongue position, and I found I have much better control. I have much better success in the altissimo register. I have much better control of the low register in particular, that was kind of like the one I battled it out. It's like, well, the tongue has to be low to play low notes. I have found that if I think high back of the tongue, really fast, cold air, laser beam focused air down to the low register, I actually have much better control. Okay, it really focuses and centers in that sound that so oftentimes just gets splatty and spread, and no one wants to listen to that, right? Good.
Do you use your jaw to help them get down to the lower notes a bit?
We're going to get there here in a second. So that's what the back of the tongue is doing, and the middle and front of the tongue slopes forward. Okay, so the syllable I think for that is the French EU syllable, which can be tough in Texas sometimes to teach. I always start students with an E, and then I say oo. Now start E, and move toward the oo. E, stop. Like halfway in the middle, okay? So the roundness of the embouchure, the tongue is saying E, the lips are saying oo, E. Okay? What does a French cow say? Okay. So that's the best one I got for today, I'm sorry. Okay, so the back of the tongue is high. The back of the tongue is controlling the airspeed. The middle of the tongue is sloping forward. The middle of the tongue is responsible for, in the saxophone world, we talk about voicing a lot. Again, there are different schools of thought. For some people, like, we could talk about voicing all day. For others, that's the V word and we don't talk about it, okay? At the end of the day, we're all doing something with the tongue, regardless of what we want to call it. I'm an advocate of the word voicing. I think about vowel sounds a lot whenever I teach and whenever I play. The middle of the tongue is responsible for accessing the upper register, for accessing the lower register, okay? So back of the tongue, always high. Middle of the tongue is going to be what slopes down more for the low notes. It goes a little bit higher up for the high notes, okay? Tip of the tongue is responsible for articulation. Okay, so I think of this kind of three parts. Back of the tongue is always high, middle of the tongue is moving, tip of the tongue always close to the reed, responsible for articulation. Okay?
So there is an online question that's unrelated to tonguing.
Sure.
But she asks, what is the benefit of the bar on your neck strap, and is there a preferred neck strap for beginner players?
That's a really good question. So the bar on my neck strap, what this does is it creates some space. And unfortunately, this neck strap, I cannot remove the bar. There are some that have a removable bar. There are also like aftermarket third-party bars that you can add to a string style neck strap. I've had a lot of students that will purchase one of those, $15, and it gives them a lot more comfort. What that's going to do is create more space here. So a lot of beginner neck straps, they tend to cinch tight here. This is very uncomfortable. It's also going to create tension. When we have the pressure of the neck strap here, we tend to react to that. We try to like lean into the tension and we get tight shoulders, tight neck. So what this does is just opens this up. It's distributing the weight more toward the collarbone, okay, which makes the saxophone feel a lot lighter, much more comfortable to play. As far as beginner neck straps, I use this fancy harness because I have a saxophone around my neck some days 6 to 8 hours teaching and playing. And so I want something that's really designed for long-term comfort. For students, something that's inexpensive is just fine. They don't need to go like crazy over the top. I really like the D'Addario neck straps. They're inexpensive, I think like $10, $15 price range. They do have a padded option as well. That's a corded style or a string style, which means if you wanted to later on add a bar, you can absolutely do that. The only neck straps that I absolutely don't like are the Neotex. I see those all the time. They're padded, they're comfortable. The reason I don't like them is the padding is stretchy. That neoprene material stretches. So students, anytime their horn is bouncing up and down, they're creating tension, they're gripping onto the instrument, okay? This neck strap has zero give. The padded D'Addario neck straps are more comfortable. They have zero give. They will not stretch, and that's why I like those. So they're affordable, very inexpensive, durable. They can be upgraded with a crossbar later on if they decide to do that, and they don't stretch. The most important thing is that they don't stretch. Yeah. Question? Teeth, top teeth are anchored onto the top of the mouthpiece. I do have to go around and check students all the time. They don't like the vibrations, so they try to like double lip and get away with it. I've seen that all too often. Mouthpiece patches are a great option. They usually have two different sizes. The black rubber that's a little bit thicker, it looks like a bicycle patch, a bicycle tire patch. There's usually a clear, like thinner, harder material that just provides some protection from the vibrations without the thickness of the cushion. I personally double stack my mouthpiece patches. I put a clear one on top of the black one and then put that on top of my mouthpiece. I think that that's really comfortable. I have the structure of the clear one that my teeth don't tear through in a couple hours of practicing, but I have the padding underneath of the black one. It also forces my teeth a little bit farther apart, bigger, more open, round sound. So I'm a big advocate of those mouthpiece patches. The teeth should be more or less aligned. Some students will have a large overbite, large underbite. Saxophone is a very forgiving instrument. You can play saxophone. A slight overbite is perhaps preferred than an underbite, but you can also play saxophone with an underbite. You can have a big cushy bottom lip or a thin lip or no lip at all, and you're okay to play the saxophone. Very forgiving. We talked about the lips. As far as the lower lip, okay, I see this a lot. Students are taught to roll the lower lip over the teeth. That's how I was taught, and I, like as many sixth graders do, they like go to town with that. I played for so many years with the lower lip like entirely inside the mouth. And you can play with an okay sound like that. Well, the first time you try to like stand in front of a band and play a concerto, you have like really no dynamic control. You can really start to hear the grittiness as I try to push. I also lose all use of the altissimo register like that. Yeah, just way too much lip inside the mouth. Okay? So I always teach students, you should be able to see the color change in the lower lip from the outside. I like to think of the syllable V. Okay? So right where your top teeth naturally hit your lower lip is about where I want the reed to make contact with the lower lip. You should be able to see that line. Okay? And as soon as I make that change, a lot more dynamic control. Okay, I regain access to the altissimo register just by having that lower lip in the correct position. Okay. The jaw basically only serves a couple of purposes. The jaw helps to align the teeth, okay? And the jaw assists in vibrato. Other than that, I'm not an advocate of using the jaw for anything else. I've heard a lot of band directors, I've heard this myself as a student, a young student, for low notes, drop the jaw. I absolutely keep the jaw set at all times, okay? I want to reach the low register and the upper register with the middle part of the tongue through changing my vowel sound or voicing, okay? So jaw is always set until I begin to introduce vibrato, and then that is created by the movement of the jaw hinge, okay? Perhaps like one exception to that rule is like if I'm playing jazz, then I might do, in a jazz style, there might be some jaw manipulation for subtoning or like really dramatic scoops or things like that. But for classical pedagogy, jaw should be set, should be relaxed, okay? Throat should also be relaxed. I tell students to yawn, to feel the walls of the throat be totally relaxed. I know it's really contagious. Good. And then we talked about air, fast, cool, focused, and that is achieved, again, by that high back of the tongue position. I always think that at the basis or the core of every saxophone-related tone issue, air is almost always the issue. Okay? So that's going to be really important. These mouthpiece pitches that are here in the packet can be really helpful. Once you have students blowing with the correct air, the high back of the tongue, fast, cool, focused air, I'll have students work on matching these mouthpiece pitches. I've written ones out for more of a concert, classical band sound, as well as those for a jazz sound. For alto, it's the easiest to remember. A for alto. And these are concert pitches, okay? So I hear a lot of students that are way higher, usually about a concert C, not using enough air, not using fast enough air. Okay? Apologies to the front row. Okay? That's the amount of air that I'm putting into the saxophone at all time. When I have students play on the mouthpiece, I tell them it should be like a New Year's Eve party favor. Okay? Like this is not the time to try to be delicate and sensitive. That is just going to result in a weak sound, but big forte sounds. Okay? And that concert A is going to give you your best results. Okay? Likewise, there are other concert pitches there for the other instruments. C, A, G, D for S, A, T, B. Another, oh, by the way, if you do have students that are producing that concert C, I can usually just have them correct that, telling them to do a really large crescendo, and as they begin pushing more air, their embouchure usually will naturally fall into place. Like I said, pretty much every issue is created by air in some form or fashion. So we might think of it as like, oh, they're biting, they're too tight. That might be the case, but it's a domino effect. Why are they biting? It's usually because they're not using enough air, so the reed's not vibrating, so they have to push up into the reed to get the vibrations to occur. So usually, if we can get the air locked into the right place, the embouchure is going to follow. Okay, so if they're producing that high concert C, once I get them using the correct volume of air, this is naturally going to relax. Does that make sense? Cool. Another good test to make sure that their embouchure is set correctly is octave slurs. So octave slurs on the saxophone should be effortless and pretty rapid, okay? So I usually start with just left hand, G, A, and B. Okay, pretty instantaneous response, not a lot of delay whenever I press or drop the octave key. A lot of times what you'll hear, if they're too tight, they're not using enough air. It's like a really delayed effect. They're having issues with descending slurs, can be really tricky on the saxophone. Okay, usually that's because we're not using enough air, and as a result, we're too firm. Okay, every once in a while, I have a student maybe who comes from a jazz background and they have the opposite issue. It's like the octave key doesn't work. It's because they're under voicing, they're too low. They're producing lower than the concert A on the mouthpiece by itself, and I can just usually get them to firm up a little bit. Okay. Any questions so far? Cool. Mouthpiece placement. I think that Mr. Story hit on this a little bit yesterday. He talked about the point of resistance, right? He said that you could find it, right, if you look sideways. I can definitely see that on mine. What I like to do is use a piece of paper and just slide this between the mouthpiece and reed. And I don't want to like force it down in between the reed and mouthpiece, but where that naturally comes to rest is the point of resistance, okay? And that's about the point where I want my lower lip to rest. Notice I didn't say top teeth because that implies that we have a perfect bite. So you do have to adjust the top teeth accordingly. If the student has an overbite, their top teeth might be farther past the point of resistance so that their lip is at or near the point of resistance. Okay. Likewise, if they have a pronounced underbite, their top teeth might just be barely hanging onto the tip of the mouthpiece. But most importantly is that our lower lip is in that correct position. Very infrequently do I hear students that are taking too much mouthpiece, but that's going to result in a big spread, bright sound. Kind of honky sounding. A lot of overtones in the sound. Very, very bright and edgy. Most frequently, I see students that they just have like an aversion to having the mouthpiece in their mouth, and they're just barely on there. Very thin, brittle, bright sound. They're going to struggle when they get into the low register. Things are going to want to start jumping up the octave. So getting that lower lip right at that point of resistance is going to give me my best success. I can play really loud, and I won't demonstrate that. You can play low, you can play high, you can play really soft. Okay, just being set in the right place on the reed. It's going to give me the most flexibility, the most sensitivity. When you do have students switching, so that point of resistance applies to all saxophones. Okay. Now I only brought my soprano today, but most commonly you're going to have students switching to tenor and baritone earlier on, right? Maybe 7th, 8th grade, maybe soprano in high school. That point of resistance is going to be the same. So you can assist your students, like when you switch over an alto player to bari for the first time, help them, one, find the point of resistance. I like to take a pencil and just mark it on their reed, at least until they get used, develop that muscle memory. For soprano, it's going to be a lot less, a little bit closer to a B-flat clarinet. Also, you can assist them in achieving the correct concert pitch on the mouthpiece. Those two things are going to get your bari players to sound like bari players, not alto players that got switched at the last second. Okay. The other thing I wanted to touch on, and the reason I have my soprano, is the angle of entry. So clarinet is more, 30 to 45 degree angle of entry into the embouchure. Saxophone is pretty straight on. Okay, what I always teach my students is that if you have perfect posture, and you're going to balance a stack of books on the top of your head, you want the top of the mouthpiece, I call it the beak of the mouthpiece, should be parallel to the floor. Okay? Top of the mouthpiece where we rest our teeth, parallel to the floor when I'm in a perfect balanced position. Okay? Notice how far out the soprano is whenever I play like that. Okay? I constantly have to tell students, it's a saxophone, it's not a clarinet. So I see a lot of soprano players, these real kind of honky sounds. Okay, so now once I've established that angle, I don't actually play the soprano like a heralding trumpet, straight out in front of me, but I establish that angle. Once that angle is established, okay, I'm going to look naturally down lower at my stand where it's set in an ensemble setting or in a quartet setting, okay? But that angle has been established, that relationship of the mouthpiece to the mouth. For alto tenor Barry, it's quite a bit easier because we have some kind of a curve in the neck to naturally bring the mouthpiece to that position. So here it is, straight up and down. This is parallel to the floor. This is marching band posture. I want to bring it down to my right hip, and notice my head follows, so that relationship, that angle does not change. Okay? That'll get your high school soprano players. We don't need help on soprano playing with thin sounds or playing out of tune. It's a soprano saxophone. It's its own challenge, but we can definitely, by getting them in the correct position, by playing it with a saxophone horn angle, not a clarinet horn angle, that's going to really help open up their sound quite a bit. How are we doing on time? What time are we out of here? Just want to make sure.
I believe it's noon.
Okay, cool.
Let me double check.
So articulation, I'm just going to be really quick with this. I know there was a fantastic articulation clinic yesterday. Many of you were probably in attendance. What I always teach students, this is a weird analogy, I know. I teach them to tongue with the fingernails of their tongue. Yep. So this is my tongue. Back is high, middle is sloping down. I don't teach right at the tip of the tongue because students will take that literally and they'll try to thrust the tip of the tongue to the tip of the reed, which is not what I'm doing on the saxophone. I'm tonguing right where my fingernails are. So it's the top of the tip of the tongue to the bottom of the tip of the reed, but that's kind of a mouthful. So I just tell them, play with the fingernails of your tongue, right there at the very, very tip, okay? The top of the tip of the tongue. And the tongue is moving up and down, never forward and backward, okay? If I'm playing a very high voicing, middle of the tongue is coming up, still top of the tip of the tongue, right where the fingernails are. If it's a lower note, maybe I'm coming up a little bit more underneath the reed, but it's the same point of contact. Okay? For vibrato, this is where our jaw does move. I begin with teaching a jaw vibrato, and then over time, as the student develops and as we go faster and faster, I call it macro to micro. So we begin with the jaw, eventually, when I play with vibrato most of the time, I don't think you can see that my jaw is moving because it's really made its way just down here into the lower lip. But if I start there, it's going to be way too minuscule. So I always start with the jaw. I like the syllable va for a couple of reasons. One, because it reinforces the lower lip placement. Va, 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 va. When I was a beginner, I learned ya, 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 ya. I don't love that because it imparts some kind of a change in the tongue position. Ya, ya. And I don't want to students to mistake that the tongue should be moving when they're doing vibrato. Likewise, wah, 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 that has a change in the lip. So I don't love those. I just do va, 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 okay? So that lower lip is set, okay? Yes, ma'am?
About how early are you starting to introduce that?
Usually, as soon as students become curious about it. In a classroom setting, I know sometimes it can be tricky because you have those that are excelling and some that are maybe a little bit farther behind. Once they're producing a characteristic, beautiful sound, then it's time to introduce vibrato. That could be second semester of 6th grade in a lot of cases. Certainly, if you have like a split beginner saxophone class, that might be a good time to introduce it, because otherwise they might not be introduced to it at all until they make it into full ensemble. I know for me, I was not introduced to vibrato until I was an 8th grader. So it just kind of depends. For me, it was all done in private lessons. So if you have like an instructor that can come in and work with your saxophones, but I would say like if you're, you don't have a lot of outside help coming in, you're the only band director working with the saxophones, I would at least introduce them to the concept by the end of their 6th grade year before they're going into full ensemble. But yeah, some of them might get there earlier. They might listen to a recording, they might listen to you demonstrate, be like, what's that like wiggly sound? Like as soon as they become curious about it and they begin to notice it, then you can usually kind of have that conversation and get them started, okay? With vibrato, this is the center of pitch. I'm just going to be dropping the pitch down slightly with the jaw. I always practice this with a metronome, metered 8th notes, triplets, 16th notes. Okay, starting very slowly. Eventually, the ideal, in my opinion, ideal rate of saxophone vibrato is somewhere in the 300 to 350 beats per minute range. So triplets at 100, 110, 120, kind of at the peak is about where I find for classical saxophone vibrato that we're going to fall. Everyone's going to be slightly somewhere within that range. I like to use the Tunable app on iOS for practicing vibrato. It helps us to visualize, because saxophone does use a pitched vibrato. It's really easy to get unwieldy, and now all of a sudden they're vibrating, but they just are out of tune, or they're making other sections sound out of tune. So I use Tunable. First of all, I want to establish a beautiful in-tune sound, and then I want my vibrato to be within the realm of that green stripe. So I am playing with vibrato, but it's not crazy wide. I'm not manipulating the pitch by too much. Likewise, if you have like a strobe tuner, I don't have one on here, but you can get the wheels to bounce without spinning. That's another really good way to practice vibrato. Once they're spinning, that's going to equivocate to an out-of-tune sound. Okay? There are some exercises in here to work on developing flexibility. Saxophone's a very flexible instrument. I always tell my students, with great flexibility comes great responsibility. We have to practice the flexibility of the instrument. So there are a number of exercises here. A lot of them are just variations of bending pitches. So for example, like the half-step exercise, maybe I'm fingering an A, producing an A. Now I'm going to finger a B flat and bend that down using my voicing, dropping the tongue lower in the mouth. Okay, working on the flexibility. The front F trick, very similar exercise, pitch bending off of the front auxiliary F. And notice that my jaw is not dropping. So this is all tongue manipulation. Back of the tongue is always high, tip of the tongue is for articulation, the middle of the tongue is where I'm manipulating these pitches. Okay? Yes, sir.
So another person online asked a question. When should saxophonists use vibrato in a large concert band setting?
Great question. In large concert band, usually I'm only using vibrato in soloistic playing. If I have a solo, if I have a soli with the section. If I'm playing with another vibrato instrument, So if there's like something with flutes and saxophones paired, I might use a very sparse vibrato. Again, I have to be careful because many instruments that are vibrato instruments are using more of an intensity vibrato, where the dynamic level is changing but not the pitch. If I'm like bending the pitch, I'm gonna make them sound out of tune. I'll never use vibrato when I'm playing with traditionally non-vibrato instruments. Frequently for saxophones, we play with horns. Anytime I'm playing in unison with horns, never vibrato, always straight sound. Otherwise, the French horns will get mad at us. The horn section will get mad at us for making everybody sound out of tune. So most of the time in concert band, straight tone. If it's more soloistic, if I'm paired up with a vibrato instrument, then just a little shimmer of vibrato. Yeah.
There is another question. Can you demonstrate what you would say to sixth graders to introduce vibrato for the first time and what it would first sound like?
Sure. Well, when I'm introducing sixth graders to vibrato, I'm just going to demonstrate it. Okay. So a lot of times it might come through playing something soloistic. I might ask them questions about like, well, what are you hearing whenever I play that? And I might try to make the vibrato a little bit more apparent, obvious, so that they're really hearing that vocal quality to the playing. Whenever I have beginners play with vibrato, the tendency is that they like undercommit to it. So in the beginning, we're going slow and we're really working on dropping quite a bit. A lot of times, like if I'm working with a class, a section, I'm actually showing them where I want them within the pitch, up at the bass level, and then with a drop jaw, okay? In the beginning, I just want them to be a little like wild and crazy with it, okay? A big drop, okay? As they speed up, and I use the analogy of like, you know, if you are back here with your hands and try to clap as fast as you can, right? The only way to speed up my clapping is to get more narrow with it, right? So I start really big, wide waves, okay? And then as we speed it up, it's going to naturally become more narrow. It has to become more narrow in order to pick up the speed and arrive at our target. But in the beginning, it can be kind of nasty, okay? And that's the kind of work that I would be doing in sectionals, in a smaller group. Obviously, you don't want your sixth graders or seventh graders using vibrato like that in an ensemble. It's just not usable. But when if you can pull them out or introduce it to them in a small group, big, wild waves is just fine. Okay? Macro, all the jaw. As they speed up, it becomes more micro. The movement finds its way a little bit closer to the lower lip. No. Question? Any other questions? How are we doing on time, Tamari? We're about out of time.
Don't we go till 12:10 on this one? If you have more, go a few more minutes.
Okay.
Five more minutes?
Sure. So the rest of the packet is really dedicated to technique. I have a chart of chromatic fingerings in here, where to use the chromatic fingerings, when to use them, as well as the way that I like to mark them in my music, and would suggest that my students mark those chromatic fingerings in their music. I'm a big advocate in the chromatic scale, forked F sharp, side B flat, and side C. I teach that in the chromatic scale. And so there's an exercise, and if you go to that website and you can download that packet, but I like to pivot on these notes. So doing these like little 5-note chromatic exercises, D to F sharp. Which is that first chromatic fingering. F sharp to A sharp, which is also pivoting on another chromatic fingering, the side B flat. back to D an octave higher than I started, bypassing through the side C, which is when I would introduce that. Okay, like I said, that packet which you can download, and I just didn't print it because it's even more pages in this handout, so you can, it's on Google Drive. If you can't access it, just shoot me an email. My email is on the top of the packet, and I can share all those and any other resources that are helpful. But all of the chromatic fingerings and the rules when to use regular fingerings versus the chromatic fingerings. There's also a large chart of common alternate fingerings, okay, mostly having to do with pitch. The saxophone is, I mean, any woodwind instrument, really, it's a game of compromises. You know, wherever I set my mouthpiece, certain notes are going to be very well in tune and other notes not as much, right? The tendency on saxophone, in very broad stroke, middle C sharp, open C sharp, and lower is going to tend toward being flat. The exception to that rule is the low B flat is like 20-25 cents sharp on all saxophones. I have this tone ring in my bell, maybe you have seen that, and that helps just with the pitch of the low B flat. This is 3D printed, pretty inexpensive. That helps with the pitch of the low B flat, but middle C sharp and lower tends to be flat, so a lot of the fingerings in here are ventings, you know, opening up tone holes lower than the fingered note in order to bring the pitch up. Middle C sharp is the nastiest note on the saxophone, so this one I would certainly teach my students an alternate middle open C sharp. It just tends to be like very nasal, very thin, and it's really flat on most saxophones. Really easy fix for that is add the octave key and the third finger. That becomes your new middle C sharp. It's going to help raise the pitch. Sometimes on my saxophone I'll even add some other keys to get that to open up even more, but that's a really easy quick fix. Once we get to middle D, anything with the octave key down is going to tend toward being on the sharp side. Okay, so corrective fingerings for there, we're usually looking to add something lower, okay? Some kind of a like shading fingerings or resonance fingerings on clarinet. You know, very similar, we can do that on saxophone. In order to darken the sound, bring the pitch down on those fingers that tend to be really bright and tend toward being very sharp. I have a list of recommended equipment there. That, of course, like as soon as you hit print, it's probably slightly outdated. So, I mean, feel free. I'm not a huge gear person. I've been playing the same equipment. This is the same saxophone I've been playing since I was in 8th grade. Same mouthpiece and ligature I've been playing on for the last 10 years. I'm not a huge gearhead, but I do try to stay on top of the trends and at least test out what's coming out. I'd be happy to make recommendations, you know, above and beyond this list here. There's also a list of recommended listening for both classical as well as jazz artists. These are all, you can find these on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Music, and certainly share that list with your students, get them inspired to listen and spend time with the music. Any last questions before we wrap up?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What age where people put like a ring like how you have? Is that for any age or?
It could be any age, probably like more advanced high school students. Yeah.
And then I've also seen other people use like cloth rings or just thinking other things or.
Yeah.
What kind of variants are there for that?
So like one easy hack is to get like a Dr. Scholl's foot pad at Walmart or CVS, and you can peel the backing, adhesive backing, and put that on the wall opposite the low B and B flat key. That's a quick fix. I've like handmade saxophone mutes out of wooden drapery rings and wrapped with fabric. You can do that. This is really quick and easy. This came from Will Peak. He 3D prints these. You can find his website online and very inexpensive. I can show you the difference that it makes. My low B flat. Settles in for me around 20 cents sharp. And that gets me within the ballpark of playing that note in tune, which is really helpful. A lot of other notes I can adjust. I can, make adjustments with the voicing. I can adjust with fingerings. The low B flat, there's nothing I can really do. And if I'm trying to play softly and I'm trying to like change the tongue position, it's such a precarious note to begin with. Having this is like the cheat code to help with that. So, yeah. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you, Tamarine. Thank you so much for spending the time with me.
So Dr. Barger is doing the top 3 bands here at Camp Honor Symphonic Concert High School, I assume. So tomorrow when you're doing your sectionals, if saxophone's one you're wanting to hear, you can go to his room. I did run into Lindsay Ivan. She's teaching the middle 3 flute group, and she specifically wanted to invite y'all. She's wonderful, and she's teaching a group that she's going to be working more on this stuff that a lot of you would be doing. So if you were wanting to see flute, now we do have a flute clinic coming up, the very last clinic Friday, but if you're wanting to do that. Also at the Top 8 at KSI lunch, if there's anyone you're like, well, I want to go watch this person, but I don't know who they are, to ask them. If they're there, I can try to hook you up with them. So let me know. There were 2 people that signed up for the luncheon that weren't in Top 8 at KSI, so they said if somebody else didn't, that you could have their spot. So if you were in Top 8 or KSI and you're wanting to attend the luncheon but didn't sign up for some reason, come talk to me. We'll make sure we don't have too many people, but not too few. And then other than that, I think we're good till 1:30. 1:30 will be John Liner on jazz.